Welcome back to Gerodynamics. Okay, another video in this series about who I am politically. All right, the last video was kind of long, talking about taxes, something I'm kind of passionate about. Obviously, you can tell I work in that industry. Now, let's talk about spending, also something I'm very passionate about. Okay, so just to get this out of the way, I'm mostly talking about in our current system. I do believe that we should have a balanced budget amendment, that should be passed, and that should be moving forward balanced budget amendment. We don't have that. The likelihood of getting that passed is very low. Sorry, hiccups. So let's talk about spending as it is right now. So currently, we have a system where where politicians come together and they say, "Hey, last year we spent this much, this much. This year we want to spend this much." And then the other politicians are all like, "Last year we spent this much. I think we should spend this much. And for us to do that, we need to cut. We need to cut this, and we need to cut that, and we need to cut the other thing. We need to cut." And then this politician is like, "Why do you hate old people? Why do you hate the children? Why do you hate the poor people? Why do you hate them?" It's annoying. It is so annoying that we have to do this every year. And usually when they're talking about cuts, they're not even talking about cuts. They're talking about, hey, you want to increase, or we have it established that we're going to increase this thing we're spending on 10%. I think we should only increase it by 5%. Why do you want to cut that? No. They're not cutting it. They're just not increasing it as much. Holy crap. Holy crap. You can't even cut something, actually cut it. You just want to lower the amount that you increase it, and all of a sudden you hate the children. You hate the kids. You hate old people. You hate the military. It's so silly. It is so silly. Here is what we should do, right? You don't even need to pass a balanced budget amendment to make this happen. You just need to have a zero-based budgeting system that is the way that that politicians pass the budget. All right. Who is familiar with the zero-based budgeting system? I am. I do it at my house every month. You probably do too. You may not even realize you do it, but this is what you do, right? You say, "All right, so this month, this bill is going to be this, and this bill is going to be this, and this bill is going to be this, and I've worked this many hours, and I have this much money coming in," and so, okay, so I started here with my revenue, my income. All right, I paid this. 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 Hey, I have like this much left. Do I want to see a movie? Do I want to go out to the movie this month? That's what most people do, right? I paid all my bills. Now I have a little bit left, and I'd like to go see a movie. Or I'd like to buy some Magic the Gathering cards. My girlfriend, she'd like to buy some shoes. Can she go buy some shoes? Yes, babe, you can go buy some shoes. But I'm buying some Magic cards. That's what regular people, that's the conversations that we have, right? The government doesn't have that conversation. The government doesn't say, "Hey, I made this much, and I've got to pay this, and I've got to pay this, and I've got to pay this, and so now I have this much left over to do these fun things." No, that's not what they're doing, right? They're like, well, hey, we spent this much last year on this thing, right? And I need to raise that. And the other person's like, "No, you need to raise it by less than that because our revenues aren't going to go up that much. You need to raise it by less than that. We owe these debts. We need to try to cut down the debts because here's the thing about debts. You pay interest on those debts. Eventually, the interest is going to eat up all the money, right? And then the economy collapses. It just does. So anyways, okay. So here's what I think. You come into it, you say, hey, last year, because the government budgets yearly, or they're supposed to, they do a lot of stop gaps and a lot of continuing resolutions and all those sorts of things. But they're supposed to be coming forward. I would say, you should probably be looking at this in no later than September, because it's due in October. That's the fiscal year. You should probably actually be looking at it from the previous October, honestly. But, really take it seriously in September, right? So you take it seriously in September. You're like, hey, we got to get this budget passed, guys. There's this requirement. We can't be doing these continuing resolutions anymore. Let's pass a budget. Okay, what were the revenues last year? Okay, well, the revenues last year were this much, right? Well, how do we know we're going to get those revenues? Well, let's see. Take a look at, historically speaking, how many times have revenues not gone up? Probably a lot less than you think it is. Tax cuts. They passed tax cuts. Revenues went down. Nope. They passed tax cuts. Revenues went up. Can you make an argument that they should have gone up more? Maybe. But they didn't. There were tax cuts, and revenues still increased. There's been a few instances where revenues have not gone up. Most of the time, when revenues don't go up, you know what it has to do with? It doesn't have to do with the percentage of taxes that people are paying. It has nothing to do with tax cuts or tax increases. It has to do with the economy. So, you probably saw some revenue decreases after 2008, where everything was like, you probably saw some revenue decreases after the Great Depression, right? Or during the Great Depression, because, it kept going and going and going and going because the government kept trying to fix it. Look into it. Like, seriously, the Depression probably would have ended a lot sooner if the government didn't keep trying to fix it. Similar to the 2008 recession, by the way. Okay, so the government can't fix everything. But that's not what we're here to talk about. That's a whole different video. Okay, so basically, you have this line. What was the revenue last year? The revenue last year, well, we'll throw out a number. We'll say the revenue last year was $4 trillion. Okay, well, let's go ahead and create a budget that is $4 trillion. Why? Because there's almost no chance that you're not going to be able to cover that budget. And maybe at a certain point, you'll be able to say, ooh, revenues are looking pretty good. We had 5 trillion come in. We have this whole extra trillion. You know what you can do with that whole extra trillion? A couple things. There's a couple things you could do with that extra $1 trillion in revenue. You could throw it at debt. That's what I would do. But you don't have to. You could, throw it at debt. You could throw it into the next year's budget. It's called a surplus, right? Oh, okay. Well, all right. So we have this extra trillion. Well, next year, not only did we say, hey, the previous year we had 5 trillion in revenue because you had that extra trillion. You had 4 trillion plus an extra trillion, 5 trillion. Well, it's pretty much a safe assumption that we'll have 5 trillion in revenue this year. Plus we have this extra trillion. Now you could budget at 6 trillion. Holy crap. That's 2 trillion more than last budget. That's great. That's great. The government's spending a lot of money. That's great. I don't think so. But that is another thing you could do with it. And I wouldn't be mad about that too much. I wouldn't be too upset about it. A little bit upset because there's better things. That debt thing, that would be my first thing. You know what else you could do with the surplus? You can give it back to people. I know that has been controversial in past instances, like the George Bush George W. Bush, he took that surplus and he's all like, well, there's this surplus here. It wasn't really a surplus. That was part of the problem. But anyways, that's a whole nother video too. But he said, hey, there's a surplus of money. I'm going to give it back to people. And I think, what did we get? $300? $600? I was happy about it. I was like in my 20s, you know. I was like, hey, I'll take this 300, 600 bucks, whatever it was at the time. I'll go out and buy some clothes. I don't know. I think that's probably what I did. I probably bought some clothes. I was 20. I wanted to look good, you know. So yeah, so that's something you could do with a surplus. And yeah, so those, I mean, I guess those are kind of your three options, right? Oh, there's a fourth option. You could invest it, but government investing is kind of questionable. But if we have something, so say like Social Security is a whole video on its own. But say if they had taken the money that they pulled out of your checks for Social Security, well, it wouldn't be your checks. It would have been your grandparents' checks or your parents' checks. And they had taken that money, and instead of just dumping it in the general fund and spending it, they had taken it and they had invested it. Our Social Security would not be in the situation it is these days. It would be like flowing, overflowing with money. Because sure, there have been some downturns in the stock market. But say you had invested the Social Security fund in a very safe like mutual fund, right? Not in like individual stock trades like Enron. You didn't go out and buy some Enron stock. You just did some mutual funds with the Social Security fund. Say you did that, right? And you invested it. We wouldn't be having the problems that we're having where, oh, well, Social Security might not get paid if we don't pass the debt ceiling. If we don't increase the debt ceiling, then people on Social Security, how are they going to get their checks? You got to be kidding me. Anyways, so you take this, you say, hey, we had $4 trillion in revenue last year. We create a $4 trillion budget. Another option, another possible option, is you decide ahead of time what you do with excess revenue. You say, hey, I've got all these spending things that I want to do, right? I need to pay for this, and this, but I would like to pay for this, and this. You know, I'd like to increase funding to the education department. That's a whole nother video, by the way. I would like to give more money to kids for their education, right? Okay, well, you can put that in the excess spending fund there. You know, we say we're going to give the education department, you know, millions of dollars, right? Well, if there's an extra trillion, we're going to give them 5% of that, right? We'll say, hey, whatever the excess revenue are above what the budget is, we say 5% of that is automatically assigned to the education department, right? Then if you're doing that, then the education department knows how much money they have, right? They're not questioning how much money they're going to have. But maybe towards the end of the year, they're like, hey, you guys are getting this extra money. You can go out and buy some more laptops for the students. You can go buy some extra books that you didn't think you were going to be able to get. You could, you know, take your kids on a field trip, you know, because this extra money that we weren't sure, but there's, you know, a possibility that you're going to get it. You could do those sorts of things, right? Not, you know, not, oh, I don't know how much we're going to get this year, so we just can't plan, you know. No, you plan on this much, hope you get this much, right? So anyways, so you say, hey, we're going to budget up to the revenue from the previous year. We're going to have these other possible spending, you know, based on a priority system, right? So, you know, you could do it on a priority system. You could say, hey, if there's an extra $1 million in the revenue stream, well, that first $1 million goes to this thing. And if there is a extra $2 million, well, that first million goes to this thing and then the second million goes to this thing, right? You could do it as a priority system. You could do it as a percentage system. You could do it as a priority system. You could assign the budget, however you want to do it. But it's a zero-based system. So you're not talking about, hey, last year we spent $10 million on the Department of Education. So this year we have to at least spend 10 million. And if you talk about spending 9 million, that's a cut. No, it's not a cut. It's a new budget for a new year, right? You focus on that. You focus on, okay, we're not cutting here and cutting here, and we're going to hope we get, we don't have a deficit. No, you budget so that you don't have a deficit. If you budget as a zero-based budget, then you wouldn't have a deficit. You would never have a deficit. You would never need to borrow money. You would never need to increase the debt limit to be able to pay your bills, as they lie about. Because, that's a whole nother video about the debt limit lie. But yeah, you wouldn't need to, because everything would be budgeted according to the revenue from the previous year. And then what happens in the few instances where it does go down, right? Then you would have a deficit, right? That would be the only time you would possibly have a deficit, is if you say, hey, well, last year we had 4 trillion, we're going to budget on 4 trillion, let's go. And then, you had a bad economic downturn, so you only had 3 trillion. Oh no, we have a $1 trillion deficit. Guess what the first priority is for any excess budget in the following year? Excess revenue, sorry. So next year you do have to budget for 3 trillion. But more than likely, not only are you going to get 4 trillion, you're going to get more than 4 trillion. So all of a sudden you can wipe out that deficit in one calendar year or one fiscal year. Not, we've got this debt that's we're going to be paying interest on that for generations, which is what we have right now. We're never going to pay off the debt as it stands right now, right? So speaking of that, in the current system, we have a system where we just keep adding to the debt of the country because every year we have deficits, right? So when a politician tells you they've lowered the deficit from last year, that's not a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing, but it's not what you think it is. It means they didn't increase the debt by as much as they did the prior year, right? We increased the debt, just not as much as last year. Winning. No, it's not winning. It's not winning if you have a deficit every year. So let's change the way that we budget so we don't have a deficit every year. And then we can focus on paying off the old debt, because that old debt does need to get paid off. It's going to weigh us down. It's going to ruin everything if we don't pay it off. So we do need to focus on that. And we can do that without harming the kids and harming the old people. We can do that. What we need to do is we need to not waste money on this project that has nothing to do with the old people and the children. Has nothing to do with the military. Hey, there's this bridge to nowhere. There's this turtle tunnel. These things. Let's how about those? Maybe we could put those in the excess budget, the priority spending excess budget. So if we have extra revenue, maybe we can make that turtle tunnel happen. Probably shouldn't, but we could. You have this pet project that you want to spend all of our money on, right? Yeah, that can come from the excess, the surplus revenue, as it were. Okay, all right. This video is getting a little long. I can talk about this stuff forever. A zero-based budgeting system is the direction that that we need to go under the current system. A balanced budget amendment is, fantasy land that I would love to see happen, but it's not in the cards right now. And so in the meantime, let's start holding them accountable and telling them they don't have to do this game of cuts and increases that they do every year. Let's do a zero-based budget. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good day.